Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Yao Hua, so Julie definitely got that right. Welcome to a French Talk event. So tonight we'll be talking about urban pollution. And it's a very, very important topic because according to a report from the United Nations, as of last year, slightly more than half of the world's population are living in cities. So that's about 55%. Let's, to get an idea of how big a change this is from, say, decades ago, let's see how many of you were born or alive, in the 50s. Please raise your hand. To get a sense, let's see. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we have a very young crowd with us, right? So when the three of them were born, worldwide there was about 750 million people living in the cities. Now, there is close to 4.2 billion people living in the cities. And that projection is just going to increase and increase. Okay. And in Malaysia, it's about 75% of people are already living in cities. So cities make us a lot more productive, but it puts us in such a dense condition that we produce a lot more waste, and then we are breathing the waste, we are living in our own waste, sort of. Well, all of that, fortunately, is manageable. And to give us an idea tonight, to talk on this topic about urban pollution. What is it about? What can we do about it? What can the country do about it? And what can we, as a regional collaboration, what can we do about it? Well, we have 4 experts here, as Julie said. So on my left is Mr. Olivier Chrétien, who is the head of the Environmental Impact Prevention at the Urban Ecology Agency for the city of Paris. Olivier is an expert on urban pollution, and he makes sure that the projects and actions taken by the city of Paris always take into account pollution factors. And then to his left is Ms. Karine Léger, I hope I didn't butcher that too much, sorry, who is the Director General of Air Paris. She was an agricultural engineer, but she has spent the last 2 decades working with Air Paris, which is an independent observatory agency of air quality in the Parisian region. So Air Paris publishes air quality information to the French authorities and to the general public to help them make better decisions when it comes to managing air quality. And second from your right is Professor Andy Chan, who is now the Dean of Science and Engineering in the City of Nottingham, Malaysia campus. Now, he's an expert in air pollution also, especially in the urban context. Now, during the 2003 SARS episode, he was one of the team leaders appointed by World Health Organization to investigate how SARS virus was spreading through Hong Kong City. And last but not least, on your most right is Dr. Ahmad Ismail. He's now the president of the Malaysian Nature Society, and he is a retired professor in wildlife ecology and ecotoxinology. So he's very much the expert of these fields in Malaysia. And he continues to be very active in nature education, conservation, and management. So if you get the gist of all that blurb, is that we have experts here who have spent decades in some working on air pollution, fighting air pollution, and also on wildlife toxinology. So let's sit back and hear what they have to say to share with us when it comes to urban pollution. Oh, on that, because of the expertise that we have on stage, we are going to gear our discussion more towards air pollution and less towards the other, for example, noise, water, soil pollution, which is also very pertinent in the urban environment. Well, to start off, perhaps I can get Olivier to give us an overview of what urban pollution is, perhaps in the context of Paris. Yeah?
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Yes, a few words about what we're doing at the Urban Ecology Agency. We are in help with our colleagues in charge of urban projects. So what are the concerns regarding pollution in a city like Paris? First one, the water. I'm not specialized in the water questions, but the question is, how can we keep our river, the Seine, clean? That's one of the goals of our mayor. She said that in 2024, for the Olympic Games, we could bath in the Seine. That's a very ambitious project. That means that we have to have a sanitation network that works perfectly well, and that means too that we don't put the main principle that we must not put all the rainwaters into the network. That we must keep it on the ground. That's the only way that we can do it, because when there's a storm, we have less storm in Paris than in Kuala Lumpur. It's not every evening, but when there's a storm, we still have some water that goes directly on the Seine. So the solution is to keep in mind that we must treat it locally and not globally in the city. That's the first point. Then we have the soil pollution. It's in Paris, we are now a city with only housing, offices, no more industry. But 200 years ago, it was the main industrial place in France. So the soil has the memory of that. So we must pay attention to the soil, because if we don't do it, we will have some gas that comes out of the ground and that goes to the school, to the housing. It's a big, it has become one of the main points of concern regarding the constructions in Paris and the projects. Then we have the noise. In a dense city like Paris, we have some proximity between all the activities, the transport, the housing, and it's very difficult to have a project that can allow to the people to have, for example, to be able to open their window because of the transport noise, the noise of the transport. So that's one of our goals when we are on a project, that the people can have access to, in their housing, in a house, to a calm environment. It's not easy. And then we have the air quality. So air quality has some common, there are some things that are common with noise, the proximity of transport, which means pollutants emitted by the cars, or the road transports. But there is also we have to act for air quality, not only locally, but at the level of the city, of the regions, and even at a continental level. That's the main topics of pollution.
Right. So definitely, from what Olivier has mentioned, would this sound very familiar to what we face here in Malaysia too? The fact that we try to, if we live just right off the street, I live on a condo just by a highway, and although I'm way high up, but if I open my windows at night, I think the whole night I can hear the traffic going, and it is noise pollution. And gradually I get used to it. So I'm not sure if that's good for my health or not, that I get used to it. And then, you mentioned that your city of Paris plans to make the river, that you can swim in the river by 2024, you say? Well, you said that's ambitious. I wonder if we dare set the same goal for our Klang River and our Gombak River. And I live by the Sungai Ara, and I definitely wouldn't swim in that river. But yeah, so living in a city definitely exposes us to all this different variety of pollution. And for today, we're going to sort of key in on air pollution for various reasons. One, our experts are here, and also because we are now living with the haze, right? It comes and goes these few weeks. So let's talk a bit about air pollution. Karine, if you can tell us, you have been working on air quality and air pollution for 2 decades now. Just give us a broad overview on how serious air pollution is in a global context, and how many maybe different types of air pollution there are.
Maybe I have a few slides to comment. So air pollution, it's a concern for all the large cities across the world. It might be familiar for you, but in all large cities like in London, Paris, Delhi, you have this concern about air pollution, and we speak about apocalypse. There are also questions of attractiveness of these cities for the tourism, but also for the economy, for the companies. Next one. However, behind that, the magnitude of air pollution might be quite different. And here you have the map of the level of particles, of fine particles. It's a map coming from the World Health Organization. And you can really see that the magnitude is different depending on the places of the world. Next one. And it's not only a question of magnitude, it's also a question of trends. And in some area, like in Europe, air pollution is decreasing, whereas in Asia, it's increasing. Next one. And when we speak about air pollution, we speak about different things. We speak about different pollutants. All the human activities, they produce pollutants. They might be quite different depending on the places of the world, but there are pollutants that are common in the different places, like particles, nitrogen dioxides coming from the traffic. Ozone, it's something that you can find across the world. In addition, you may have local pollutants. And there may also be different sources, like we don't have haze in Paris. We have other concerns, but not haze. We also have pollution episodes, but not that kind. However, in large cities, traffic is always part of the problem. And next one. Air pollution, it's important because it has different impact. It has an impact on health, and according to WHO, it's the first environmental risk, with 8 million people dying because of air pollution across the world. It has an impact on economy because the people, they cannot work, they are sick because of air pollution. It's also a question of attractiveness for foreign companies and for tourism. And this impact is increasing. You can see it's the green dots, and it's an assessment for the World Bank. And this impact on economy as a cost, it's 225 billion, and 55% of this cost is located in low and middle income countries. On the red graph, you can see the impact on health, and this part is dedicated to the impact specifically on the on the Southeast Asian countries. Next. Then there are also issues that you don't maybe think about. It's a legal issue. There are more and more citizens suing the government to court, NGOs as well. In France, we have a court case with the European Commission because we don't respect the European directives, and we may pay a fine and very large penalties because of that. It's a food safety issue. Ozone decreases the production of food, so it has an impact on food. It has an impact on climate change. Climate change increases the level of ozone, but on the other hand, there are some pollutants that are common between climate change and air pollution. Biodiversity, the plant, the animal, they breathe, so it means they breathe also air pollution. And this one is very serious here. The relationships between the countries is also very much affected by transfer of air pollution. And I know that here, because of haze, this relationship with Indonesia is a concern. And in some cases, when you have very old buildings, they are also affected by air pollution. That's why this is getting a very mediatized and political issue, and that's why you get this very large coverage about air pollution in the different cities.
Karine, you mentioned that worldwide, so you said was it the World Health Organization or the UN said that worldwide there's 8 million people dying from air pollution?
It's WHO, it's the World Health Organization.
So that's every year? You say it's an annual?
Yes, it's annual.
Wow, okay, that's definitely surprising. But if I ask, like, so how do they like determine that the death was due to air pollution? Because we don't just walk and then we drop dead from air pollution, right?
The impact on health. It's very much documented. Like in Europe, the key point was the grid smog in 1956, and they were able to show that the increase for a period of 2 weeks in sulfur dioxide on particles had an immediate impact on health, and they could link it with deaths of 4,000 people. That was really at the start of realizing that air pollution actually could kill people. And then there are epidemiological studies, a lot of them across the world, and they can really show the link between certain diseases on respiratory disease, on cardiovascular disease that are very specific from air pollution, and make the link between those diseases and the level of pollution. An increase or decrease on air pollution really much affect those diseases and the number of people affected by this disease.
Right. So if I understand that correctly, then it's sort of like a subtle and chronic effect rather than usually as an acute effect that, you said so in the 50s, it was in the 50s, so there was a London episode of serious air pollution, and then 4,000 people died from that. But of this 8 million, is it usually a chronic, drawn out kind of a process?
The 8 million is rather due to the daily air pollution the people breathe, which is of poor quality, and this daily pollution has most of the impact on health. Right. However, in case of acute air pollution, depending on the magnitude of the pollution episode, you may have a peak with a very acute impact on the health of the people, and especially it's very sensitive people like children, women who are pregnant, the elderly. You really have a peak during this very acute period of poor air quality.
Right. You mentioned, various impact of air pollution. So it's not just on our health, right? Also on the economy, on climate change, on international relationships, on, I heard you say wildlife too. You said it also affects wildlife, yes. Right? Biodiversity. Perhaps, Ahmad, you can tell us a bit about maybe how air pollution, I guess in the Malaysian context, our animals, our plants, or even like, I'm not sure if the microbes are affected by air pollution. What do we know about how air pollution affects our wildlife?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As a Malaysian Nature Society, the oldest nature-based society in Malaysia, we're going to be 80 years next year, 2020. 80 years, we are going to celebrate 80th anniversary. So, Nature Society, we talk about plants, about animals, and all what affect them. So air pollution is one of them. We know we need air, we need oxygen, we need water to survive, to live. Right? So if air polluted, it's very simple. Imbalance of oxygen, nitrogen, and so on is not there. So when you go to the lung system, then as what you mentioned, it's cause toxic in the system. So it will cause death. So especially now, when we have haze recently, and now thousands of birds migrating from north to south. They are passing through East Asian Australia flyway from Siberia down to Indonesia and Australia. So I'm worried if the haze is not stopped. So how the bird will across the Strait of Malacca or pass through Java and later Australia, and in March they might come back to the north. They breed in the north, and after they're growing, they fly together in group to southern hemisphere. Recently, we saw thousands of raptors fly south just after haze. So this is very important for biodiversity or bird conservation especially. We're not talking about primates yet, right? Because they cannot fly, they stay there. When the air are polluted, so it will affect their health and their population. There's one thing I cannot tell in detail now because we don't have a detailed research in this. We are just collaborating with many primatologists in the world to work on all aspects of pollution on primates, including the loss of their habitat. So the air pollution is very important. When we work with animals, they become an indicator, right? If you know, in Malaysia recently we have problem with the Kim and Pasigudang, where air are polluted, and then I try to check the birds there. Usually near the building, there are many birds are roosting, right, on the tree. But when we have this kind of pollution, the birds fly away. But we didn't realize that the bird is our friend to tell us what's happening, right? In the history, long time ago, they used canary. They released to the coal mine, right? So that if something happened to the bird, then they don't go in. So the bird is our good friend as indicator to tell us about the level of air pollution. So it's very important to know and understand about the air pollution, the source of pollution, what happened to our health, our environment, because of course our health and environment will affect our industry and our economy.
Right. So, you know, when Ahmad was talking about the migrating birds, it sort of reminded me, I was speaking to a bat scientist. What do we call bat scientists? Chiropterists, or I don't know what we call bat scientists. Bat scientists.
The bats. Right?
Yeah, bats.
The bats and the bees are very important in pollination. Right. So if they are not affected by air pollution, something we cannot eat durian, you know. So, because even though it's smelly, it's increased the price now. Durian, because bats play roles.
Yeah, so the bat scientist was telling me, so he was studying these bats that actually fly over from Sumatra to Malaysia and then to northern part of peninsular Malaysia. And they suspect that the bats could pick up the chemicals of the flowers in a rainforest or the fruiting trees in the air as the wind carries the volatile smells, right, over from peninsular Malaysia over to Sumatra. So the bats in Sumatra pick that up. That's the hypothesis, that's the idea. And then they fly over to peninsular Malaysia. So it just sort of makes me wonder with the haze now, we can smell the haze, whether it will actually affect their sense of smell. But anyway, that's not about discussion here today, just starting to worrying for the bats. But Andy, perhaps from, if you can, from a Malaysian perspective, you know, Karine was talking about the, you know, sort of like a worldwide and a Parisian perspective of air pollution and the different types of pollutants that we can get. Is it the same in the Malaysian context? Can you talk a bit about air pollution in Malaysia?
Bonsoir, and thank you for having me here. I think different places have different contexts, definitely. It doesn't mean that a city, you know, even two fairly similar cities like Kuala Lumpur or Singapore, if I put it closer, they actually have different origins of air pollutants. For example, of course, you know, just to share with you, clearly we will be very disturbed by the recent haze episodes. And these problems don't exist in Europe. Okay, don't exist in general in Europe, and so the sources, for example, in the past few weeks of the haze comes from, of course, what we call biomass burning, when you burn the palm tree plantations and all that, and of course the wind carry all these haze to peninsular Malaysia. Of course, in general, you know, if I can give a compliment to Kuala Lumpur or Malaysia in general, apart from those very severe haze episodes, air pollution in Malaysia is generally in control. The air, by international standards of Malaysia, is actually fairly good. Of course, there are issues that we need to think about. There are issues that we need to work with, especially about this transboundary haze. But other than that, you know, the amount of industry here, the amount of traffic here is not that intense. Whereas, for example, in Paris or in New York, Hong Kong, where I came from, we have other pollutions. Some of in Kuala Lumpur, especially, one of the biggest problems that we have in air pollution, and probably you don't notice, is the high concentration of ozone, which is a result of some chemical reactions that takes place in Malaysia because there's abundance of sunlight. You don't see it, you don't smell it, but it's there, and it's actually very, very damaging to our respiratory system. So these are something that probably no one talks about a lot, but actually it's one of the most severe in this region.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? That got me worried a bit because I didn't know about that. What ozone and sunlight, and you said we should know about it, but yeah. And then you stop there. Yeah.
I don't want to elaborate too much.
Maybe
do. It's a political secret. No. You see, there are at least 5 or 6 air pollutants that we constantly measure, and ozone is one of them. Most of you would have heard about the ozone hole and all that, and there's a depletion of ozone near the Antarctic region. But in the urban context, in the air that we breathe, ozone is considered a pollutant. It's bad for our health. We shouldn't have ozone around in where we breathe, okay? And ozone is usually formed, it's not emitted, it's usually formed by some kind of what we call photochemical reactions. You emit something, and then with the presence of sunlight, it is transformed into ozone. And ozone actually inhibits our breathing. It actually is very, very damaging to our respiratory system. So this is actually a severe issue in Malaysia because, as I said, number one, no one talks about it. Number two is actually of a high concentration because, as I've mentioned, it is created by the presence of sunlight. And of course, Malaysia has loads of that. And so therefore, we do create quite a certain high concentration of ozone in the urban areas of Kuala Lumpur or greater Kuala Lumpur. So this is something that people don't generally talk about other than the haze.
Right. Yeah, so I was just going to ask, so is ozone a serious air pollutant in Paris because it's in the temperate and you don't get that much of a solar?
We also have ozone, and ozone is an issue for the whole hemisphere. It's the only pollutant, for instance, in Europe, which is still increasing because it's formed because of NOx and those from pollutants from the traffic and from industries. And we do have ozone not only because we have sun, but we have ozone also because we have those precursors emitted by the cities. And the problem with ozone, it's increasing because of the human activity at the northern hemisphere, but it's also increasing, and it might still increase because of climate change. With climate change, if we have more heat wave in Paris, like the one we had this summer, we may have even more ozone. However, there are some good news because at the European scale, with the European Union, we have regulation on emissions of ozone precursors, those pollutants coming from the traffic and from the industries. And given the very important heat wave we have had this summer, we had a lot of episodes of ozone, but the intensity of these episodes was smaller than what we got in 2003 when we also had a heat wave, which means that if we can act on these precursors, maybe we still have episodes of ozone. However, their intensity might be lower, which is important for the health of the people.
So am I correct to say then that do you know if we are monitoring these precursors in our car, or we are? Oh, not bad. Okay, so we are. Okay, let's look at the haze then. So I know, Andy, you have been working on sort of like a map to show where the hot spots are, and perhaps we can settle the argument of where the fires are once and for all with a super slide and...
Julie, s'il vous plaît.
And
just to show you, this is a map that this is an app actually we created with NASA to show where are the hotspots are, so-called where are the fires coming from. Now, we all blame Indonesia, and I want to do a bit of favor for them. but I'm not an Indonesian. So this, clearly you can recognize where is Malaysia. And the red patches are currently, actually yesterday, where are the burning sites in Indonesia. Okay, so each hotspot is basically one approximately 3 kilometers by 3 kilometers all burning site, okay, or on fire. Okay, so we are along the equator. So the wind generally blows from east to the west, so therefore the wind carries all the pollutants from the smoke and all the way to attack Singapore and Malaysia. That's how it goes. Now, I want to elaborate a little bit more about this, okay? Now, we have haze recently, okay, the last 2 weeks. I probably want to ask this question. You probably didn't recall any haze episodes for the past 2-3 years? And this year we have it. Do you think that Indonesian stopped burning last 3 years? Of course not. In fact, every day they're burning. So how the wind carries the smoke to Malaysia, there's of course clearly there's a source of it, there's a fire, but there's also the what we call the climatology, the way the wind blows, how is the weather that would actually affect air pollution. That's what we study. For example, I just want to explain this. Last 3 years, we have what we call La Nina, okay, which is the opposite of El Nino, which means that the region that we're talking about is generally more humid. There's more precipitation, more rainfall and all that, which therefore puts off the fire and puts off the smoke quite quickly. Whereas now, these 3 years, especially this is the first year that we have what we call the El Nino, the general climatology is that it is much drier. So therefore, there's no water to put off the fire because it's less humid, so it actually intensifies the fire quickly, and therefore, the intensity of these what we call hotspots becomes greater, and therefore we experience haze. And I can tell you, in the next 2 years, there would be more haze. In fact, this is not even the worst year. Last 3 years, we don't have haze. You also enjoy more durians, because the weather is actually more humid, there's more rainfall. It's actually good for harvest. Now, I want to show you a bit more about how the world behaves as well, okay? People would think that Indonesia is the only people who is burning. If you take a look at the world, this is captured from satellite, you can see this is not true. If you look, of course, I'm sure that you have heard the news about the burning in the Amazon area, and you can see it over there in South America. So it's equally bad. You don't hear from this, but actually in the region of southern Africa, Angola, Rwanda, and all that, there's equally just in fact, an even worse disaster in mankind. Literally all the savannas over there are in some kind of burning. You can see from that, okay? I cannot make it up because this is from the satellite, okay? I also want to show you that even developed countries are burning. If you can look, for example, no disrespect to Europe, actually there is quite a number of hotspots in Europe, Eastern Europe in particular. Now, we don't hear complaints about this because they are able to control their burning. They know when to burn. They don't burn in mass, because you see that all the Indonesian fires are actually clustered together. They are more scattered around, so therefore it means that the effect towards the neighborhood is less. There is quite a large amount of burning in China, India, and also America, okay? It's not a crime to burn plantations. I'll explain that later on, okay? Everyone burns that. But if you can control the timing of the burning, the intensity and the magnitude of burning, you can actually reduce a lot of the effect to neighboring countries. And this is something that we want to advocate more, international collaboration, international policy making, and the management of burning overall across the world. So this is what we are trying to work in. Thank you.
Andy, if I add, These haze issues, here's what happening in Malaysia. What we are concerned about, the whole world are talking about carbon. So our land is peat swamp forest, hold very high carbon. So when we burn it, it create a lot of other issues. So this is why technology, we know to identify where are the hot spots, but we don't know or we don't take action on controlling it. So this is an issue. That's what we need to share at international level, so that this transboundary haze or whatever pollution from the forest fire can easily be controlled. Because the peat swamp forest is different, as what Andy said, different background and different way to solve it, different issues that we are facing. This is important and special about our peat swamp forest. When it fire, cause haze, and peat swamp forest so very rich in biodiversity.
Right. So Ahmad brought up, both Andy and Ahmad. Well, just looking at the map, is it still there? Just no, never mind. Just looking at the map, we could easily see how air pollution is a transboundary issue, right? The ashes, the dust, the pollutants in the air, they are not going to recognize national borders. Malaysia and Indonesia, or the ASEAN in general, somehow still working hard to come up with some sort of an agreement of what we can do to, to mitigate this haze. What about the EU perspective, from the European Union's experience? Is there a very strong legal framework for collaboration and control of what the other countries are doing in terms of air pollution? Because our Prime Minister, went to UN and said that we can't do anything, the world can't do anything to another country that's burning its forest. Is that really true?
Just maybe to go back to haze and to pollution episode, because we don't have haze, but we do have pollution episode, and those pollution episodes, there are always two compounds. There might be one transboundary compound for particles and ozone. It's not necessarily the case for other pollutants. And there is one local compound, which means that when you breathe a very poor air quality due to particles because there is a haze is the major part of the problem, but you also get particles from the traffic and from the local condition. And it's important because and it's the kind of messages with municipality of Paris we try to provide when there is a pollution episode, that we get pollution from transboundary pollution condition, but we also produce our own pollution, and all of this is exported to the surrounding country. So we are very much linked together. That gets back to your question regarding European Commission, how the European Commission is handling this issue by having very strong regulation, the European directives for all the member states. And those regulations, they are on the quantity of pollutants that the member states are allowed to emit, and they are, on the other hand, on the level of the standards for air quality. And the member states have to respect both of it. By acting on those two issues, the quantity of pollutant and the quality of the air you breathe, they intend to improve air quality, and air quality has improved a lot, and to reduce the transboundary pollution in case of very specific meteorological conditions. But really, when we have a pollution episode, what the prefect does is to reduce the local traffic, because by acting at the local scale, even if you get pollutant from your neighbor, you still reduce a little bit the intensity of the pollution episode.
Yes, for the city of Paris, we defend this position because in the ancient situation, the préfet, the police of Paris, which is in charge of the measures regarding the peaks, was doing an expertise, scientific expertise, to know if there has to be local measures, and they made a diagnostic. Does it come from another part of Europe, or is it just Paris. But we say no, a part of it comes from Paris, so we have to do automatic measures that can be put on very much more easily because it's automatic. When you don't know, you have to know it the day before or even 2 days before. That's for us, it's a target to have a provision two years before and to be able to put in place some measures early enough to have some efficiency.
What both of you said, there were two important points that stood out to me, I guess surprising points. The first one was that when, Karine, you said that when there are external pollutants coming in, one thing you can do on a local scale is to act on local pollutants and clamp down on that. I don't think we have heard our Malaysian authorities saying, oh, when there's a haze, the first thing we can do is, don't drive so much. We always say that we don't go out so often, but we don't really say that we can clamp down on our own pollutants, at least in that period. How do you actually convince, for example, the citizens of Paris to say that, oh, there are pollutants coming in from Germany or from Spain. Hey, Parisians, why don't you reduce your pollutants first? And then we'll talk with the neighbors later. How do you actually convince them of that?
It's because of health. What we are looking for, it won't solve the pollution episode. However, what we want to do is to reduce the intensity of the episodes. And each micrograms per cubic meter you gain, it's better for the air quality. And it's also because this pollution we get, in addition to the pollution we produce, we send it also to the surrounding region, and we send it to England. And that's how we manage to convince the people, because really that the intensity of the episode we try to reduce. And since we cannot act on the surrounding countries and region, the part on which we can act is the local pollution.
So it really requires an integrated sense that we are all of us are in this together. So we are like, we really disregard the borders. What about the ASEAN context? Is there this sort of like an understanding or an effort towards this kind of an understanding to improve, I guess, collaboration? For example, even monitoring, right? Is there an effort to have Indonesia tell us first that there are fires, or Malaysia tell Indonesia first that we have fires, that kind of a thing?
Well, in fact, from a scientific point of view first, monitoring and all that, actually the ASEAN countries are actually doing quite a lot, especially about the haze. Indonesia, there are lots of monitoring stations. There are also quite a bit of haze produced on a similar kind of origin in Thailand and Vietnam, because these are fairly agricultural countries as well. So as far as monitoring, scientific monitoring is concerned, there are quite a lot of things doing within ASEAN countries. I think what is lacking, and really this is something that we really need to learn from European Union. European Union really is a very strong conglomerate of countries which really work together. One of the things that we try to advocate here is what we call emission trading. Some of you might have heard of the term, but it's a bit like stock. Actually, you can buy stocks or trade emission. What happens is that different countries are given certain allocation, and if you can reduce it, you can use that to earn some money. For example, like
so we're talking about carbon emission here?
Not only carbon emissions. Carbon is one, but in terms of general air pollutants. For example, just say I use an example, ozone. Okay, so each country. Maybe ozone is not a very good example. Say SO2, sulfur dioxide. Each country is given a certain capacity to emit. And if you emit less, you can, or say, if you emit too much, you need to pay for it. You need to pay extra for it. Or you can buy the capacity from other countries and therefore levy a tax on these people. The European Union is actually very advanced in this practice, and they work together. And of course, number one, they trade it. And number two, because it involves money, every country will try its best to reduce pollution. because no one wants to pay that levy. This is something that we are already practicing in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, which is slightly more advanced in individual basis. But maybe between countries, or what we call transboundary emission exchange, this is something that we can work together. And I think that from a economy point of view, this might be an effective way to force countries to really act on air pollution control and emission.
If I may add this, another developing country is facing a lot of problem because, say for example, on the solid waste, we still use some areas open burning, right? So this is another source of air pollution. And we have studied in most of ASEAN countries, and it shows some contamination in, say for example, we use a human breast milk as a breast milk as an indicator. So we found some accumulation in there. I mean, I highlighted a few times in the newspaper, but some people agree, some people don't agree. You can refer to many journals published from the study in Vietnam, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia. It shows similar pattern. So if we want to have this agreement, so we have to solve these basic or fundamental issues first. If people are still fighting for space, for food and health, and then you want to talk about this carbon trade or pollution trade, so you might have something. That's why collaboration or help from other developed countries is very important. As I mentioned earlier, when Andy mentioned about hotspot, right? We can identify easily why we cannot tackle it first. Not in Indonesia, but in Malaysia too. We know that is an area we have forest fire, but we cannot or we don't solve it as quickly. Same thing, we talk about human habit or knowledge and awareness about air pollution, how far they understand, how far they want to share knowledge with other people to reduce air pollution. When we have a heavy haze, we're still driving the same number of cars to Kuala Lumpur city. So how we can reduce this? Education, public awareness, collaboration, sacrifice is very important if we understand the basic or fundamental issues of air pollution.
Regarding the trading of emission, maybe it's good for the economy, but I think for the environment, you may end up moving the problem in different countries. That's why for Europe, they went rather for air pollutants to national emission settings. You have national quantity that you can emit, and you're not allowed to emit more, no matter if you pay. It's like for the toll when there is a low emission zone. In some cases, if you pay, you can enter the zone, even if you have a very old car. You pay and you enter. For me, the emission trading is like this: if you pay, you can emit pollutants, but it doesn't really solve the problem. Whereas with the emission setting and with the law, you're not allowed to emit more, and it won't move the emission of pollution in different parts of the world, because it's a very small planet, and whenever you emit pollutant into the atmosphere, you may get it back somehow. I remember a study in the States, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. They were complaining that they were getting pollution from China. But there was a study from a university showing that most of this pollution was coming from industries that have been moved from the States to China. And you get back this pollution that you have moved around. That's why it's also a question of regulation, and it's a question of enforcement of this regulation in addition to education.
Well, we still have a good list of questions that are written down. I don't think we're going to get there. I forgot to mention that we have 15 minutes at the end for questions from the audience, right? So if you have questions, hold on to it. So So right there we already have different opinions about whether emission trading would work, I guess, in the long run, and whether we are shifting the emissions from one spot to just to another, or perhaps it's a good enough of an incentive system to promote good behaviors. So to me it sounds like, well, if the experts do not yet agree, then what more the public? So there's a real dire need for education and increasing the awareness of even what urban pollution is and what we can do, and whether and we shouldn't just be pointing fingers. And all four of you have been involved one way or another in education, educating people about pollution. Could any one of you speak about, perhaps let's start with Paris first, the efforts that you are doing to educate the citizens of Paris about managing air pollution? Well, let's be more specific. What would be like a real challenge in teaching them when it comes to air pollution?
I wouldn't speak only of air pollution. I think that the work that we do is to let them know what could be a city without pollutions. One of the good ways, I know that it's done in Kuala Lumpur, it's to have some operations. We have in Paris what we call Paris Respire, Paris Breathes, and every Sunday some quarters are close to the cars, so people discover what could be the city without cars or with less cars, and it's a good way to let them experience what is a city without pollution. And then we think that they can be more, they can accept more and enjoy even the measures that we can take. So I had a few slides, I don't know if I have the time, but we try to rebalance the public space in Paris, which was dedicated to cars, which was 60 to 70% of the public space for 10% of the moving. So what we're trying to do is to rebalance it, to give place to pedestrians, to bikes, to bicycles, and to public transport with dedicated lines for buses and tramways. It's more efficient in terms of transport. It changes the way that the people move in the city, because if they don't take their cars, they will do some other moves, less smaller, they will go less, shorter distance. Thank you. And at the end, they will live in a better environment. So the way that we can, as I said, the way that we can do is to begin by some measures on Sundays, and then to have it perhaps in the summer, that like we did for the banks of the River Seine. We made it first on Sundays, then in the summer, and at the end the mayor decided that it should be all year. And that's a progressive way, I think, that we can we can have the agreement of the people on our measures.
Right. So basically, the strategy is to let them experience it, what it could be like without like traffic emissions, and you do it progressively. We do that in KL too. How many of you here have been into KL during the no car day? There's only very limited zones that are like that. How many of you have been into KL city center during those no car days? I guess so. Oh, one. Are you Malaysian? Not Malaysian. Yeah, I haven't been either, so I actually do not know what it's like. My first thought is like, I can't drive there.
If I may add one thing, I think that behind this, there is a change of behavior from the Parisians. Don't take their cars as often as they did before. We have 30% less traffic now than in 2000. So it's not only because of what we've done, it's only because that the people have changed their mind and they think that it's better to go with public transport or by feet than to take a car and to pay and to go to have a longer time to make the trip. So it's a change of mind.
And from the Malaysian Nature Society's perspective and experience, when it comes to, the MNS does a lot of work on public education. What works and what doesn't for educating the public about urban pollution and what they can change of their own behavior? What has worked and what doesn't work?
We don't look at the negative one. We keep train people.
That's like what you do in the quarterly report. You don't look at the negative.
If you go to our HQ headquarters, we call it urban community forest. So that's what we are educating public every Saturday. You go there in the morning. Volunteers come, they bring their children, they plant trees, because planting trees is very important. We are still fighting to conserve or protect Taman Tugu, Feather Hills, Bukit Kiara, Kota Damansara, and all the way from Batu Cave to Temple Park, because that will be a green area for Kuala Lumpur, Greater Kuala Lumpur later. Because if you cut all the trees, you will see the change. Who going to balance or control the air pollution? We need more oxygen, with more nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and so on. So it will cause toxic to our health. So then, we need to plant more trees. In our education program, we tell them why we need trees. So everybody at least should plant 2 trees. If not, you should plant it tomorrow. So then we start from today. We have, I think, thousands of marabou trees to be planted. Taman Tugu is our focus, Lake Garden and so on. So many other things. In short, I will tell you, we have, in Malaysia, we have 500 schools with us. And then if one school have 1,000 students average, so plus the father and mother, we can reach 1.5 million students or people in Malaysia if we want to give certain message. For example, don't go anywhere today to save to reduce air pollution, for example. Plant your trees this month, for example. In this October, we're going to celebrate 1 week, Environmental Week. So every school, we call it Nature Club schools. So we ask them to plant trees, for example. So this is the way Malaysian Nature Society educating the young and the old, public in general.
Yeah, reach them when they're young, and in fact they can see the trees growing as they grow too. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Right, so that's all the time we have. If I can sort of wrap up in a line, we have learned about what the components of urban pollution, air pollution in particular, some misconceptions, what we can do, what the country or countries are doing or not doing. It sounds like it sounds like, of course, it goes down to education. It goes down to, very critically, our own behaviors, right? Karine was saying that, Karine and Dr. Ahmad was saying that we have to start education from young, in school. Actually, I would say that we have to start education at home, right? The parents and siblings, we have to learn it from there first, and that's something that we can all do if we want to end the night, evening on a more hopeful note. And with that, thank you again for joining us. Please join me in applauding our very esteemed speakers.